to reevaluate the USA-Israel relationship. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has said securing a full Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon is a top priority as Lebanon marks Resistance and Liberation Day. The day commemorates the withdrawal of the Israeli occupation in 2000 after 22 years of occupation in southern Lebanon. 25 Ebola patients in Congo have fled after attacks on hospitals, with perpetrators of the attacks wanting bodies released for burials. The World Health Organization says 220 suspected deaths have occurred in this outbreak so far. US Secretary of State is now on his third day of his 4-day visit to India. Today, Marco Rubio and his wife visited the Taj Mahal on a cultural visit as the trip aims to strengthen economic ties between India and the United States. A trade agreement is expected to be finalized by the end of the trip. In comments today, Pope Leo has apologized for the Church's role in the transatlantic slave trade and has also warned about the rise of AI, saying it risks leading the world to a path of unending war. The Pope has also repudiated the just war doctrine and decried global conflicts. And finally, in the United Kingdom, former Scottish National Party executive Peter Murrell has pled guilty today to embezzling more than $540,000 from the party to buy luxury items. Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader, has responded and said she was misled, but the SNP remains under scrutiny. We start now today with some comments from US President Donald Trump. He has now tying the highly anticipated peace deal with Iran directly to a massive expansion of the Abraham Accords. In a sweeping post on Truth Social, the president revealed he told leaders from 8 major nations over the weekend that joining the Normalization Pact with Israel is now a mandatory condition to participate in the ultimate settlement with Tehran. Trump explicitly singled out Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt and Jordan, asserting that they must simultaneously sign the accords as a reward for intense American diplomatic efforts to solve the region's complex conflict. The president warned that any country refusing to sign would display bad intentions and forfeit their part in the landmark deal. In an extraordinary geopolitical proposal, Trump added that he wants to bring the Islamic Republic of Iran into the Abraham Accords as well, claiming the move would create an unparalleled, united and economically dominant Middle East. US negotiators have reportedly been instructed to begin the expanded signing process immediately. The Abraham Accords are a series of historic agreements brokered by the United States that established normalized diplomatic, economic and security relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Signed in 2020, they marked the first formal normalization of Arab-Israeli relations in over 25 years. We're now joined for this story by 2 guests, our first being Dan Perry, an international affairs expert joining us from Tel Aviv, and our second being Jason Isaacson, who's the Chief Policy Officer at the AJC, and he's joining us from Washington, D.C. I first want to go to you, Dan. I want to start with this unprecedented move by President Trump. He said that potentially he could be calling on Iran to join in the Abraham Accords. What's your analysis of this latest statement from President Trump, and what's your analysis of the possibility of Iran actually joining into the Abraham Accords? It would be unprecedented.
Well, it would be incredible, and I cannot see this Iranian government, this version of the Islamic Republic regime, agreeing to any such thing. But the move is creative and brazen. This is the very definition of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. And I must say, in terms of creative diplomacy, it's quite impressive. Trump doesn't get a lot of credit for brilliant strategic maneuvers, but if this works even a little bit, it not only might change the narrative of this war, which is currently one of frustrating failure, but also help Netanyahu in his upcoming election, which will in a way come as bad news to probably the majority of the people in Israel who really want him gone. but it changes things. Look, the landscape, as of yesterday or the day before, was that whereas it had been hoped that the war could end with surrender terms in which Iran gives up not only its nukes, but also its missiles and its proxy terrorist militias all over the region, and maybe even can be compelled to agree to democratic reforms. None of that was going to happen. They're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which had never been closed, in a situation where now it has been revealed as a huge source of potential Iranian blackmail going forward as well, in exchange for a deal on a nuclear program, which was roughly attainable before, and which is very similar to what President Obama arrived at in 2015, that Trump foolishly walked away from in 2018, inaugurating the current era of Iranian nuclear enrichment, which was one of the two reasons for the war, the other being that they massacred tens of thousands of protesters. So that's looking like a failure. And for Trump to have spun that into something that convinces enough Americans that it was worth the effort would have been difficult. But if somehow uh, he persuades countries like Saudi Arabia that want the war over at this point to, get over themselves and just normalize with Israel, which has been a thing they've all been talking about for years now, then that is just electrifying. And it would really change things in the Middle East. So we'll see where it goes. But as diplomatic maneuvers go, this one is incredibly intriguing.
Indeed. Jason, I want to turn to you now. You're joining us from Washington, D.C., the political capital of the United States, of course. This move from President Trump could change, or as Dan mentioned, it could change the perception of the United States' success in this war, especially if an outcome of the negotiations would have such regional ramifications, such as these further countries joining on to the Abraham Accords. Jason, what is your analysis of the likelihood of these countries joining on to these accords as a way of potentially ending the war? And what's your assessment of a potential reaction inside the United States to this move from Donald Trump?
Well, thank you, Ruby. First of all, I agree with everything that Jan just said. This would be historic. It would remake the Middle East. It would remake the world, removing a source of enormous tension and conflict and misery for millions, hundreds of millions of people. If there were this spreading umbrella of peace and understanding, that's the fantasy that we all aim for. And that we hope to achieve step by step. And of course, there was very significant progress made in that direction just 5.5 years ago with the Abraham Accords. It broke the mold. It made it seem all of a sudden possible that Israel could have full diplomatic relations and even security relations with countries with which it had been ostensibly, although not actually at war, but certainly at loggerheads in a confrontation that had lasted for decades, and there could actually be the possibility of peace spreading throughout the region. But that was then. We're in a different era now. The war in Gaza over the last 2.5 years has turned typically hostile populations even more hostile toward Israel. A lot of anger about Israel, about the way that the war was conducted. A lot of concern across the region about the war in Lebanon, even though the leaders across the region recognize that Israel had no choice but to do what it can to destroy the Hezbollah militia that has been firing missiles and drones into Israel. Nevertheless, populations are uniformly across this region hostile to Israel. So for leaders to step up to the challenge that President Trump has presented them, to reach beyond their public sentiments and recognize the benefit for their populations, for the region, for global security and regional stability and security, and embrace the Abraham Accords framework. They might have to rename it, by the way. I'm not sure that the Saudis very much want to be part of something that was really fashioned for the UAE and Bahrain, but perhaps they would, in line with President Trump's thinking. It's a wonderful vision, and I applaud the ambition of the president and the vision of the president. Whether any of that is achievable, though, is of course a whole different question. I don't know how it is going to be possible for Pakistan, for Turkey under President Erdogan, who has made an obsession over his hostility toward Israel, to all of a sudden and join Qatar and Saudi Arabia and other countries in suddenly embracing the Abraham Accords, embracing the relationship with Israel. Great if we can get there. I don't know if we can get there. In terms of the question you asked about the reaction in the United States, there would be universal celebration of this result if the president is able to achieve this phenomenal success. It would be helpful to the president in the midterm elections coming up in November, and as Dan said, it would be certainly helpful to Prime Minister Netanyahu in his re-election efforts later this year. But again, a huge if surrounds all of these questions. Great if we can get there. Whether we can is a whole other issue.
Indeed. Back to you, Dan. There's another big if, and that is if Iran would sign on as well. I know I previously asked you this question, but I'm now wondering about how it could possibly go if these nations in the region, of course, there's been difficult relations between the Gulf nations and Iran, strikes being exchanged between the two, between these neighbors as well. But how would Iran react to this latest statement from Trump? He's also said, there's also been reports that on the call there was silence from some of the leaders of these countries, perhaps indicating how big of a political move it would be for them to make. But how will Iran react to these nations joining the Abraham Accords?
I don't think Iran's reaction is going to be particularly profound. They expected it in many cases already. It's not their concern. They're at loggerheads with these countries. I mean, these countries, whether or not they're eager to continue to have kinetic warfare against Iran, want the regime to fall. Iran knows that it faces, on a strategic level, near global opposition to everything about its regime, even though tactically some countries may oppose fighting it or may fear it. Certainly now that its leverage with asymmetric warfare has been so clearly manifested. But no, they're not going to react in any game-changing way to Saudi Arabia or even Qatar joining the Abraham Accords under whatever name. The idea, though, that the Iranian regime could make peace with Israel seems to me to be a bridge of fantasy too far. There's no way. There are those that will tell you that, having proxy militias all over the region trying to spread jihad, death, and mayhem, that's part of their DNA. Maybe, certainly looks that way. Opposing Israel is obviously part of their DNA. It wouldn't be the Islamic Republic if they were to do such a thing. Moreover, it appears as if the junta that has organized itself, largely based on the IRGC, in Tehran post-decapitation in late February and early March of its previous leadership, is, if anything, more radical. On the other hand, they are collectively a bit of a cipher. We don't really know. We don't have a clear window into their thinking. We have all kinds of indications, and there's reports, and there's intel leaks, but we just don't know. I guess, perhaps, if there's any leverage that could be applied, it would be in the case of the sanctions and the frozen assets. Iran wants not just partial unfreezing and undoing of those two levers, but total. I doubt they'll get it, but on the other hand, they're acting like a country that thinks they have leverage because of the Strait of Hormuz and because of the obvious fear of the Gulf countries about being attacked at all, because their business model depends on Westerners doing business there without fear of being attacked. They do not have the Israelis' patience with sitting around bomb shelters. So the Iranians think they have leverage, and they're demanding this total undoing of the economic warfare against them. I can't see them getting that, But I suppose if it turns out that we're wrong about the nature of the current variant of the regime, and they are somewhat pragmatic, I could see some move in this direction, not normalization, but some move in this direction, in exchange for a total end to their economic isolation. And that would be so spectacular an achievement for the regime that who knows, maybe something creative might be organized, but it still seems to me to be rather far-fetched.
Very interesting development. Dan, thank you very much for joining us today on the program. Jason, please don't go very far. We'll be joining back very shortly with you. We now move to some breaking news. The presidential office in Brasilia has confirmed that Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been diagnosed with early-stage skin cancer. According to an official statement, the 80-year-old leader was diagnosed with a basal cell carcinoma following a medical evaluation of a lesion on his scalp. Medical officials stated that the condition was detected at an early stage and is highly treatable. President Lula is scheduled to undergo 15 sessions of localized radiotherapy to target and eliminate the remaining abnormal cells. We now move to some further developments regarding Marco Rubio's visit to India. The US Secretary of State is in India on a high-stakes visit aimed at repairing trust strained by President Donald Trump's global tariff policies. During talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, Rubio extended a formal White House invitation while addressing concerns over US engagement with both Islamabad and Beijing. With Pakistan playing a key back-channel role in efforts toward a possible US-Iran peace deal, Rubio said India had raised no objections to Islamabad's mediation, adding that New Delhi's primary concern remains cross-border terrorism. He also dismissed fears that US ties with Pakistan's military or recent contacts with China are coming at India's expense, describing them as tactical, while calling India an indispensable strategic partner. Meanwhile, S. Jaishankar reaffirmed India's strategic independence, saying New Delhi will continue securing reliable, affordable, and diversified energy supplies for its 1.4 billion people. The relationship now faces an immediate test tomorrow as New Delhi hosts the long-delayed quadrilateral security dialogue foreign ministers summit, with Rubio joining counterparts from India, Japan, and Australia. Now, we're joined by two guests for this story. We're being joined again by Jason, and we will soon be joined by Major General Sudakaji. Jason, you're joining us again from Washington, D.C., of course. We've seen this visit from Marco Rubio here to India, and there's been a major push by the United States to try and sell more energy to India. India, of course, is a big energy importing nation, trying to find supplies for its 1.4 billion population. Now, do you think that these two goals are at odds with each other? India needs energy, but it wants a diversified source of energy, and the US is willing to sell as much oil as they can, but of course India does source energy from as many locations as they can. Do you think these two priorities are at odds with each other, or do they match?
Interesting question, Ruby. The fact is that the relationship between India and the United States, which has kind of gone up and down over decades, and was clearly in a kind of a difficult spot over the last year or so with the imposition of high tariffs and immigration issues that of course unsettled the Indian American community, but also obviously friends and family back in India. And various comments that were made in the White House regarding India, not to mention the closer relationship that seems to have emerged between the United States and Pakistan, including drawing Pakistan in as a mediator in the Iran war. All of these issues are in the background of the Rubio visit. Certainly the energy issue, the fact that the United States is an exporter that wants to continue to export oil and wants the market in India and gas as well. That has been increasing over time. There is more that the United States would like to sell to India. And of course, the United States, for strategic reasons, would very much like to diminish the Indian reliance on both Iranian, which has already been severely damaged, the Iranian import, the import by India of Iranian energy, although there was a spike in that, but also the Russian oil that has been bought at a discount by India. The United States would like to supplant all of that with U.S. supplies, and I think it's all going in that very positive direction. Was also really struck by was the tone of Secretary of State Rubio's comments about what he called the strategic alliance between the United States and India, which is a kind of a term that one typically is not applied to the U.S. relationship with India. I don't think that we've heard Indian officials talk about an alliance with the United States, but certainly a partnership, strategic alignment. And so I think the net result of 4 days in India by Secretary of State will be a very positive move in the direction of closer relations between these two natural partners.
Jason, thanks very much for joining us on the program. It's always a pleasure to hear your analysis. Major General Sadakaji, I want to get your viewpoint on this visit now. Of course, there has been some inflammatory comments coming out of the White House regarding India. There's been some tensions regarding visa updates in the United States that has affected some of the Indian diaspora over there. And of course, this visit is being seen not just as a way of strengthening economic ties between India and the United States, but also smoothing over some of those tensions. What's your assessment of the visit so far? Has Marco Rubio been successful so far?
Ruby, good evening. I hope I'm audible, and thank you very much for inviting me for your show. And my very warm greetings and compliments to distinguished co-panelist Jason. And I really regard and respect his views. But the fact remains, whatever I'm going to say now, these are my personal views, not to be mistaken as the national view. I personally feel that United States is coming out with these kind of proposals or extending a hand of friendship after a hiatus of almost 1.5 years of very serious breach of trust. There is one thing which has taken a backseat or taken a serious beating is trust between the United States and India, although they may be two natural partners, large and oldest democracies. But speaking as a citizen of India, I personally feel that America is not a country which can be trusted, one. Number two, I'm saying this, there are lots of facts and figures. Let's not go to remarks of hellhole and dead economy and buying oil from Russia, which is fueling the conflict against Ukraine, mindful of the fact that China is a country which is buying the largest quantum of oil from Russia and no action has been taken against China. Europe was buying something to the tune of 37 to 43% at the peak period of oil and gas from Russia. So nothing was told about that. But India was singled out with these kind of unexpected and unsavory kind of remarks, which is not heard or used in any diplomatic relationship in international relations. So now willy-nilly, the double standard and the hypocrisy of United States of America is standing out loud and clearly. But let me take one small case. Since time is at premium, I don't think I'll have the luxury to dilate all my thought process, but let me highlight one issue. There was a time when the United States put pressure on India that a dependency on Iran has to be reduced as far as the oil import was concerned. Whatever percentage of oil, presently it is 89% approximately that we import from outside India of our total consumption in a year. And at that point in time, total import from Iran used to be 17%. So from 17%, we have come down to zero. With Russia, the peak period was September 2024. The highest import percentage was 41%. And now I believe it has come down considerably. and the dependency on America at one point in time was zero. It went up to 7%. Now I'm told in a very short span of time it has gone up to 20, 11 or 12, 13%. Or it's rising, it's going up by the day. Europe, it had around 22 to 24% prior to the commencement of the hostilities against Iran. And now, in a short time, the dependency of oil has gone up to close to 58%. So China has been told in no uncertain terms that they must buy oil to the tune of 600,000 barrels per day from USA. So, and Venezuela, we all are aware of. So basically what is happening is that the petrodollar dominance, which was quite high in its peak time, has taken a beating. It has actually declined to a substantial level. And now, in order to restore status quo ante, all these games are being played, regardless of the double standard and the hypocrisy. Different languages are being used. With due respect to the status and the profile of Marco Rubio, I must point out that as a citizen of India, one should never forget that India is not a small country. It is a country with a population of 1.45 billion. It has got sentiments, it has got emotions. It cannot be treated as a pushover. And times have changed. We are in 21st century. Might is right may be applicable and relevant as far as Thucydide trap is concerned, as per the thought process of America, but that cannot be applied to India. Particularly, I am making this point when the Deputy Secretary of State Department of USA came and attended Raisina Dialogue a couple of months back. He had audacity to say that America will never allow India to become a second China. Regardless of all obstacles being posed by USA for the growth story of India, I can assure the audience of USA and India that India is going to bounce back. It will pull off all the shocks and all the impediments of the energy challenges that we are facing now, and nothing can stop. India is unstoppable. We'll rise.
Major General, thank you very much for joining us once again on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Now we move to some statements coming out of Russia. It has now issued a new warning to the Ukrainian capital and has issued an ultimatum that has put Ukraine on high alert. The Russian Foreign Ministry has announced a massive, systematic campaign of targeted airstrikes against critical defense industry facilities inside Kyiv. In a highly alarming escalation, the Kremlin explicitly warned that its forces are zeroing in on Ukrainian drone production factories, training sites, military command posts, and what it called decision-making centers. Moscow has urged local residents to immediately stay away from all military and administrative infrastructure. Crucially, the Russian Foreign Ministry has issued an urgent directive telling all foreign citizens, international organization staff, and foreign diplomatic personnel to evacuate and leave Kyiv as soon as possible. Now, discussing this latest update with us, we have Nikola Mikovic, who's a journalist, joining us now from Serbia. Nikola, thank you very much for joining us on NewsX World. This latest ultimatum from Moscow putting the Ukrainian capital on high alert. It said it will be targeting Ukrainian drone factories, training sites, military command posts, target related to the military, but it's also warned internationals in Kyiv to leave as soon as possible. Nikola, should we expect to see an escalation of strikes against Kyiv coming up very, very soon, given the apparent seriousness of this warning from Moscow?
I don't take this warning seriously, to be honest with you, and I'm pretty sure that foreign diplomats operating in Kiev don't take this rhetoric seriously either, because this is not the first time that Russia issued such threats. The Kremlin's been threatening to strike the so-called decision-making center in Kiev for 4.5 years, and to this day, not a single administrative building has been hit. But let's say even Russia eventually decides to raise the stakes and to hit the defense ministry building or the parliament building, any other administrative building in Kiev. What will that change strategically? Absolutely nothing. Ukraine, on the other hand, also has the capacity to hit the Kremlin, the White House in Moscow, and many other Russian important administrative buildings. This threat also it's important to emphasize that this threat came not from the Russian defense ministry, but from the Russian foreign ministry. And it is not Sergei Lavrov who's in charge of the Russian military. It is Valery Gerasimov who's the one who's taking control of those strikes. So what Lavrov and his ministry issued was just, in my view, another empty threat, although I don't rule out that Russia could strike some buildings in Kiev, but as I said, that will change absolutely nothing. And also there's one more thing that I would like to point out. When you're fighting a war and when you're aiming to win, you don't announce your plans to your opponent. You just strike. You don't threaten to strike, you just do it. That's how every serious nation operates. That's how the United States operates. That's what Israel does. That's what Ukraine does. Ukraine never told Russia, we will strike your oil refineries. No, it just launched a series of drone attacks on Russian refineries, and a lot of them have been destroyed over the past month. Russia, on the other hand, constantly threatens to strike something, but what happens in reality is that it strikes garages or green markets, civilian buildings, fields. Not a single strategically important facility has been hit.
Mm-hmm. Nicola, what can we make of the timing of this threat from Moscow? There's been, of course, some very important updates in the war between Iran and the United States. Trump releasing a statement very, very recently saying that he's urged some of the Arab nations in the region to join on to the Abraham Accords if they wish to see a stop to this war. He's also said over the weekend that it is very close to being finalized. Do you think that we're seeing this statement from Russia because it seems like we may be seeing some progress in the war between the United States and Iran at this time?
Not really. I could be wrong, but I think this has absolutely nothing to do with the situation in the Middle East. I think the Kremlin threatened to strike the so-called decision-making centers in Kiev is because Russia last night or 2 nights ago already launched missile and drone strikes on Kiev and other cities in Ukraine, and the Russian population found it laughable because, as I mentioned, not a single important facility has been hit. Russia did not strike drone plants or key bridges on the Dnieper River or command centers, parts of Ukraine's military-industrial complex. According to reports, what was hit in Ukraine was a green market, some fields, meadows, empty barracks, and nothing that would cause serious damage to the Ukrainian military. And significant parts of the Russian population can see that. They are not blind. They see that the Kremlin is bluffing all the time and just threatening to strike something, but it never actually does. So they expect Moscow to take some serious measures and to fight the war seriously. That's what they expect the Kremlin to do, and Putin is fully aware of that. So he has to continue simulating, and he has to show that he's doing something, right? That he's fighting this war the way they expect him to fight. So that's why I think they threaten again to bomb Kiev, and I think they will have to do something to bomb something in Kiev. Although again, they have to balance because Putin promised even. I believe it was in 2022 not to kill Zelensky, so I think he will try not to hit his residency. But again, it is entirely possible that Russia will eventually hit some of those so-called decision-making centers, although they never defined what exactly that means. I think they mean empty administrative buildings.
Mm-hmm. Nicola, do you think that we might see some retaliatory action from Ukraine in relation to these statements if indeed these strikes do go ahead and perhaps hit some drone factories or decision-making centers, as Russia has called them? Do you think that we might see strikes from Ukraine being able to hit Moscow or perhaps several other large Russian cities?
Absolutely, Ukraine is doing that on a daily basis, but unlike Russia, that's hitting empty barracks and abandoned buildings, Ukraine is hitting Russian oil refineries and key energy infrastructure and also military infrastructure. So Ukrainian military is inflicting severe losses, the Russian military, by launching those strikes. And I think Ukraine will continue doing that because Ukraine, unlike Russia, is a very serious country. Its military is fighting seriously. Its problem is that it's heavily dependent on the West, and I think that large parts of the Western political establishment, that they are actually not interested in Ukraine's victory, or at least not in the way that Ukraine would like to win the war, which is why Ukraine cannot strike the Kremlin or kill Putin and other Russian officials. So it also has to balance and to hit some other targets rather than the Russian military and political leadership. But in any case, yes, I think Ukraine will retaliate, and Ukraine will, if Russia bombs, let's say, the parliament building in Kiev, Ukraine has the capacity to do the same thing to Moscow, to hit important facilities in Russia. By the way, I think tomorrow in Moscow, a important security summit will kick off. So if Ukraine wants, it certainly has the capacity to spoil it.
Definitely. Nicola, thank you very much for joining us today as a guest on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And with that, we are out of time, but please stay tuned on NewsX World for more news updates coming to you from around the world.